following is a presentation of
Shoutout sa Balero Boxing Club.
On Saturday, January 22nd, WBC World Featherweight Champion Mr. Gary Russell, representing Washington, D.C., will attempt to defend his title versus Magnifico Magsayo of the Philippines at the Borgata in Atlantic City, New Jersey. In the U.S., this fight will broadcast live on Showtime. Gary Russell Jr. boasts a record of 31 wins and 1 loss, 18 of those wins by knockout. His last fight was a unanimous decision victory over Tukstot Nyambayar almost 2 years ago in February 2020. Russell's lone loss came at the hands of Vasily Lomachenko in June 2014. Mark Magsayo has an impressive record of 23 wins and no losses, 16 of those wins by knockout. He's coming off his knockout of the year victory over Julio Ceja last August on the Pacquiao-Ugas undercard. This would be Magsayo's first world title fight. Magandang araw mga kaibigan, lalo na sa Pilipinas. I'm Chris from Balero Boxing, and we'll be ringside at the Borgata. I'm joined by Carlo and Philip. Mga idol, welcome. Kumusta kayo?
Oh, let's go. Woo, fight week. Woo-hoo.
So what's up?
It's safe to say this is the biggest fight so far for Filipino boxing in the post-Manny Pacquiao era. Plenty of eyeballs from all over the boxing community and the world will be paying closer attention to this one. The Philippines has a deep roster of incredible talent, all looking to climb the mountain. This Saturday, Mark Magsayo has an opportunity here to dethrone one of the elite veterans in the game, and Gary Russell Jr., and claim that prestigious green belt. Phil, your thoughts on Russell and Magsayo?
Hey, like you said, man, this is a big fight. It's probably the biggest fight that includes a Filipino fighter. And now it's Magsayo's turn. And if Magsayo wins, a lot of people who didn't know Magsayo are now going to know his name. So it's gonna be a good one.
Yeah, I'm excited about this. He's really going to fight an elite master boxer who's been champion for years. Magsayo, this is the stage to prove that he belongs on the pound for pound list after this. He's proven in the last 2 fights that he has power. And I think this is the biggest test, and this is going to be the ultimate test to become, the world champion for that green belt. I can't wait. I can't wait.
So let's start with Mark Magsayo. Heading into this fight, we had the honor of interviewing him a couple weeks ago. He uncovered a lot of things, and we did ask him some questions about his possible blueprint for defeating Gary Russell. All of us recognize that Gary Russell is an elite fighter. He's a seasoned veteran. He has incredible hand speed. He has an impressive resume. He only has 1 loss, and that 1 loss came against one of the elites of this era, and that's Vasily Lomachenko. But we also recognize that it's been 2 years since he stepped in the ring. Gary Russell has certainly admitted that he's always in the gym. He's always ready. And despite his 2-year layoff, he still has his hand speed. He still has his strength. At the same time, Mark Magsayo is a hungry 26-year-old. We did witness the knockout of the year last August versus Julio Ceja. So heading into this fight, let's talk about what Magsayo needs to do to claim that world championship that he's coveted for so long against Gary Russell.
What Mark Magsayo needs to do is to put the pressure on Gary Russell. He's fighting a master boxer. So you can't stand there and think too long. You can't stand there and wait too long, because he's going to beat you to the punch. I mean, we all know he has his speed and agility. That's Gary Russell Jr. He can't wait too long. He has to put the pressure on him. We've seen Vasily Lomachenko do it. If Mark Magsayo does the same thing, I think he has a great chance of winning those rounds. First 4 rounds of pressuring Gary Russell Jr. is going to be a statement, and if he does that, he has a good chance of beating him.
Yeah, it's like Carlos said. He has to move forward. If he plays that boxing game with Gary Russell Jr., it's going to be hard for him. Worst case, he loses. If Magsayo can cut off the ring, go to the body, slow Gary Russell down, I'm gonna say in the later rounds, Gary Russell he fatigues and he'll start to slow down, and then that's when Magsayo can catch him. Magsayo just you can look at his last fight. Going the distance is not a problem for Magsayo. He's very well conditioned. He got beat up for most of that fight against Seha, and then he finally scored a knockout in the 10th round. So he's going to carry that power into the later rounds. Gary Russell Jr., I don't know if he could say the same. He also has that long layoff, so that could play a big factor is conditioning. Ring rust affects every fighter differently, but we'll soon find out whether Gary Russell Jr. has the conditioning to withstand Mark Magsayo's power at the later rounds.
I would agree. Mark Magsayo certainly has to come forward in this fight. He also has to come forward starting in round 1. Mark does not have the luxury of waiting until the later rounds to try and score. This is certainly a great challenge for Mark, where he essentially has to claim that belt. He has to claim that belt convincingly, either through the judges or convincingly through a knockout, which is why, in my mind, in round 1, he needs to come out fast, come out strong, and come forward right away. Rounds 1 through 6 and rounds 7 through 12 for Gary Russell certainly tell a different story. If you look at the Tuxedo Nyambayar fight, his last fight, again, 2 years ago in February 2020, in my mind, that was a tale of two different halves. What did you see in Gary Russell against Tuxedo Nyambayar that could give some encouragement to Mark Magsayo?
He's going to be hard to hit. Gary Russell's going to be hard to hit in this fight. Nyambayar threw about 700 punches and only landed 100. Okay, so he needs to keep throwing, even if the percentages are going to be low. He has to keep punching. He has to keep throwing those combinations. That's his best chance. It'll be hard for Magsayo to try to go punch for punch or counter. I think he has to be the aggressor in this one. Foot positioning is going to be big on this one, fighting against a southpaw. So foot positioning, angles, combinations, coming forward is what he needs to do from rounds 1 to 12. He has to prove a point. He has to push. He has to put the pressure on Gary Russell Jr. and make him think.
Again, I think we're all in agreement that he has to come forward and dictate the pace right away. In that Nyambayar fight, I saw Nyambayar actually connecting with Russell. But again, it took into the latter half of that fight. His connect percentage was dreadful. So Carlo, you're spot on with that one. But the 100 he did actually get to connect did come later in the fight. Perhaps some of that is certainly because of Russell's unwillingness to fight more than once a year. And in this case, he hasn't fought in 2 years. That should be an advantage for Mark, and he needs to take advantage of that right away. So Phil, what did you see in that Nyambayar fight that gives Mark Magsayo some encouragement here?
You know what I saw, Chris? I saw Gary Russell catching a lot of right hands from Nyambayar, because Mark Magsayo packs up more power than Nyambayar, in my opinion. So it's going to be different from when Gary Russell Jr. gets hit from Magsayo, because he's going to feel it twice as hard. You might even get slept by that right hand. I'm counting on that right hand to sleep Gary Russell Jr.
So we were all there live again in Las Vegas at the Julio Ceja fight. But like you guys expressed, we actually expressed it too when we were sitting in the stands, because we had a stake in that fight. But there are some things from Magsayo that we know that he needs to improve versus Gary Russell. And he cannot afford to make some of the mistakes that he made versus Julio Ceja. We were hoping to get some insight from Mark in our interview with him as to what those improvements are. What do you guys think those improvements are? Where does he need to improve? And what mistakes or some weaknesses does he have to clean up heading into this Saturday?
In my opinion, the only adjustment he needs to make is his footwork. And he mentioned that in our interview. They've been working on footwork. So let's see what that footwork comes out to. And that's what's going to make a difference. Like I said, this is going to be a battle. It's always going to be a battle of foot positioning with a southpaw, all right, and angles. It's his power hand against your power hand, or that right hook against that left hook. So the footwork is going to be what he needs to work on, to use it, and we'll see what difference he's gonna have compared to the Ceja fight. I noticed in the Ceja fight he bounced a lot. He bounced around a lot on his toes. You know, these guys are in top shape, but bouncing around that way, I mean, not that they're gonna get tired, but they can get timed. They know when you're bouncing around, you're taking a break or you're planning something. That means you're thinking. You can get time. So I think if that gets eliminated, and hopefully there is some improvement in the footwork, that's going to be the key to the victory. The fight is in the feet with these two.
I agree with Carlo. His footwork definitely needs to be better, but I think Mark needs to do one more thing if he wants to secure this win, and that's putting combinations together. I felt like in the Ceja fight, he wasn't throwing enough combinations. He was trying to load up on like one big shot. Maybe he'll throw like a 2-punch, 3-punch combination, but it wasn't enough. His output wasn't enough. So, and on top of that, Gary Russell Jr.'s head movement it's masterclass. The guy knows how to evade. He knows how to use his feet to get out of bad situations. So if Mark throws 1 or 2 shots, Gary Russell could easily dodge those 1 or 2 punches. But if Magsayo throws a 3-punch, 4-punch, 5-punch combination, I feel like one of those are going to land on Russell Jr. So I feel like he needs to pick up the combination punching.
Yeah, I agree. Mark cannot miss. He cannot swing and miss. I would also agree as to the level of volume that he had versus the Ceja fight, and thinking about what he needs to do in this fight. That volume needs to increase. You're right about his perhaps lack of volume punching or lack of combinations. He loves throwing a 1-2 or even a setup hook and then his 2. He knows his power hand is his right hand, and he sets everything up to basically throw that missile punch. That right hand is deadly, but Gary Russell knows that also. I mean, there's enough footage out there and recent footage of putting people literally to sleep with that right hand. And throwing a lot more combinations will certainly soften up Gary Russell so he can throw that right hand. That's what I want to see. A little more than just a 1-2 or a setup hook with a 2. I think he needs to unload. And again, it's about putting that pressure on and coming forward constantly since the opening bell. Let's talk about Gary Russell's keys to victory and his blueprint for defeating Mark Magsayo. He is a master boxer, again, like we've all expressed. Defensively, though, he's quite good, but I don't know if he's like Floyd Mayweather good, where he never gets hit. He can get hit, as we saw in the Ambiar fight. Also, the person in front of him is someone that has extreme knockout power, so he is conscious of that. He's actually said it oftentimes, and he has a lot of sound bites out there. That's great that Mark has a lot of power, but if he can't see or can't connect against me, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, so like we all said, Gary Russell basically is a better boxer overall than Magsayo, so he has to box him. If he sits there in the pocket with Magsayo, you know, he has the capability of trading in the pocket, but he can't stay there too long. I feel like Magsayo eventually is going to catch him if he wants a firefight with Magsayo. I don't think that's a good idea. So I would say he needs to use his jab, keep him at the end of his jab, stay on the outside, and don't let Magsayo cut the ring off. And yeah, just basically box him, use his countering, use his footwork to stay out of trouble. And yeah, I would say he can win off points doing that strategy.
Russell Jr. does not go slow. He does not know how to go slow. He's very quick. He goes quick for 12 rounds. And if he can throw combinations of Mark Magsayo to, like Phil said, to keep him at the end of his jab and things like that, just to keep Mark resetting, keep Mark thinking, that Russell is gonna breeze through the rounds if he does that. That I think will be the key for Russell Jr.'s win.
I don't know if he'll stand in front of him because something bad could certainly happen, but there's a lot to prove, certainly to prove doubters that 2 years worth of ring rust isn't anything for him because he's constantly in the gym, but also that he could stand toe to toe against one of the elite knockout artists in the game.
Yeah, he needs to use his footwork, definitely. Like I said before, if he stands there in front of his opponent, which is Mark Magsayo, he's gonna catch something really bad. And for him to avoid that, he needs to circle that ring, use his footwork, stay off the rope, stay out of the corner, and not trade with Mark Magsayo. Like I said before, Nayan Bayar hit him with a bunch of right hands against Gary Russell Jr. So his defense, like Chris said, his defense isn't ironclad. It's not Floyd Mayweather level. So there's those shots that are going to sneak in. So in order for him to avoid that, he needs to, I don't want to say he wants to be on his bike, but he needs to move his feet a lot during the fight to avoid Mark Magsayo's power.
But let's talk about the Vasily Lomachenko blueprint. In my mind, he put on what many would consider a clinic. And it's certainly a blueprint for Mark Magsayo to defeat Gary Russell Jr. What can Mark Magsayo emulate or learn from that Vasily Lomachenko fight? And in turn, what does Gary Russell need to do to avoid that same type of outcome that he saw from Vasily Lomachenko?
What Mark needs to do is getting up close to Russell, putting the pressure on him with his angles and footwork. It's always going to be footwork. It's always going to be the angles. That's Mark's greatest advantage. If he can execute those very well, he can land some nice punches. He can just dominate the ring. He can dominate the positioning in the ring. He can land effective punches. Of course, going to the body is to slow down Gary Russell. But also I noticed that Gary Russell goes fast all the time. We know he has speed. He doesn't know how to slow down. He always will throw lightning fast combinations with the jabs, doubling up the jab, things like that. But what Mark Magsayo can do with his speed is to time that too. You can time that speed, especially if it's only going one pace, which is very fast. Gary Russell's very fast. So he can time that. If he can time that, Mark Magsayo will really have a good chance of winning the rounds. I really think that by winning those rounds, we'll probably make Gary Russell think, make Gary Russell panic, or we'll probably choose to start going forward. If he feels like, or if his corner feels like they're losing the fight or they're losing rounds, they're gonna have to be the aggressor and go after Mark. And if they fight in the middle, I don't think he can win that battle with Mark Magsayo.
Yeah, you made a great point, Carlo. That was actually expressed in the broadcast too on Showtime back in 2014 with Russell versus Lomachenko. Russell comes at one speed, fast, and it's something he's going to have to try and consider because he can be timed. Mark has the opportunity to time if he's coming at one speed, and Lomachenko did take advantage of that. Phil, what did you see in the Lomachenko fight as a blueprint against Gary Russell Jr.?
Well, let's look at the two main things that Lomachenko did to win that fight against Gary Russell Jr. One was he went forward. He kept Gary Russell on the back foot, and he closed that distance and made sure that a lot of those combinations that Lomachenko was throwing was right in front of him, as well as throwing volume punches, combinations. He threw a lot of different combinations, a lot of different looks at Gary Russell Jr., a lot of different angles of attack. Mark Magsayo, he needs to do just that. He needs to throw with a lot of different punches. He needs to come at different angles. If he throws the same basic 1-1-2 or 1-1 right hook, Gary Russell's going to easily see that coming, and he's going to easily defend that. So Mark needs to go forward, throw combination punches, and throw different angles, uppercuts, left hooks, right hooks, and just mix it up. He can't be he can't be basic with his combination punching. He needs to throw a lot of different combinations.
Wrapping up here, let's talk about Magsayo's keys to victory before we head into prediction. So, Carlo, let's start with you.
Mark Magsayo's keys to victory is to come forward, apply the pressure with combinations, and continue to just use his feet. The footwork and the angles will be the keys to his victory.
And Gary Russell's keys to victory.
Gary Russell's keys to victory is to do what he always does throughout his fights. He's very good at combinations. His speed's been carrying him out throughout his career, and his footwork and angles. So his keys to victory pretty much is just doing what he's been doing for the rest of his career, is his speed, combinations, and footwork.
The three main things Mark Magsayo has to do to win is, like Carlos said, keep the pressure and cut off that ring. Gary Russell's going to move around a lot, and Mark has to cut off the ring and keep up the pressure. Number two is his combination punching. He can't just throw 1, 2, 3 punch combinations. He needs to throw a lot more. So increase the volume as well. And number three is, I would say, invest in the body. If he just headhunts, Gary Russell's he's gonna dance away from a lot of those punches that Magsayo is gonna throw at him. So Mark Magsayo needs to invest in the body early.
And Phil, Gary Russell's keys to victory.
So Gary Russell definitely has to use his footwork. He can't stand up in front of Magsayo. He needs to circle that ring, and also he needs to use his jab very well. Just keep Magsayo at the end of his jab, and really just time him. Use his head movement and his footwork to time Magsayo and kind of just pick him off. If he wants to trade with Magsayo, I don't think it's not gonna be advantageous for Gary Russell Jr. to trade with Magsayo.
Yeah, I agree. Also, Magsayo again just has to keep the pressure from rounds 1 through 12. He needs to come forward the entire time and keep Russell on his back foot. At the same time, he cannot miss. We know he has that power, but it really doesn't matter if you're not connecting at all. Russell, even at 33 years of age, that's still pretty much in your prime, especially nowadays with older athletes. That is not old at all.
Yep.
Like I said, he's expressed that he's always been in the gym despite the layoff, and I believe it. He is in top condition and in top shape. However, he knows that he may go in deep against Mark Magsayo, and we'll see what he has in rounds 7 through 12. But I don't dispute Russell's conditioning here, and I think he's going to be in prime shape. This should be a hell of a fight. Styles make fights, and here we are. We have the master boxer versus the knockout artist. All right, let's head into predictions here. Carlo, who do you have this Saturday?
Well, I'm picking Magsayo. Mark Magsayo will either win by knockout or split decision.
Phil, your prediction.
Yeah, this is the classic changing of the guard. It's the veteran versus the young up and coming upstart, but I'm gonna have to go with the youngin, Mark Magsayo. I'm gonna say knockout 8th round, Mark Magsayo.
Wow, nice, Phil. Wow.
I too have Mark Magsayo. I think it's his time. This is something that he's been working for and waiting for quite a while, even at a young age of 26. But he's been in the ring in wars, and he certainly showed his resilience versus Julio Ceja, being down on every card. Again, he doesn't have that luxury or the option of being down on cards versus Gary Russell Jr.
Nope.
But regardless, I have Mark Magsayo winning and becoming the new WBC World Featherweight Champion this Saturday, January 22nd, for the WBC World Featherweight Championship. Gary Russell Jr. versus Mark Magsayo at the Borgata in Atlantic City. Mga kababayan, nasa New Jersey, puntahan natin sa Borgata sa Sabado. If you're in the area, New York, New Jersey, Philly, Pennsylvania, South Jersey, North Jersey, come and support Mark Magsayo, support this fight. Please let us know your prediction. Leave your comments below.
Go.
Mark Magsayo versus Gary Russell.
Bring it on, bring it on.
Let's go. Triple M, baby. All day. All day.
And new.
Magsayo. Payday, baby. Let's go. And new. And new, baby.